The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Tally Olson. I am back. You are comfortably zoned with me, the Tokin Jew, Ralph Tyko in Alameda, California. And I'm thrilled today. As many of you know, the whole essence of this show is to talk to the most interesting people on the planet. And today is no exception. My guest is originally a Philadelphian, and we have a lot to talk about Philly, but I'm thrilled. Here we go. Ray Scott, how are you?
I'm well, Ralph, thank you, and I am pleased to be speaking with you and your audience today.
Well, I talked to you off the air a little bit. I hope you enjoy the experience as much as I do, because we're going to get to know you, and then I'm going to satisfy my curiosity. I'm an old New York Knicks fan from Madison Square Garden, and you were the Detroit Piston coach at the time when I was growing up, first a player. This is cool. Let me start to get to know you by asking you what your music was when you were growing up. What did you listen to?
Oh, I was a lot of jazz, because that was the course of the time of the 60s. The 50s and 60s, radio had turned to the end of the dial for the African-American listener. So I kind of got into that nocturnal jazz programming with Sid, I think it wasn't Sid Hartman, Sid Mark. And Sid Mark was a Sinatra, and the big band artist Maynard Ferguson. So I liked a lot of that. And, of course, being from the community, I walked around singing to myself a lot of rhythm and blues. So,
all right. Were you into the Drifters and Motown at all? Did you
Absolutely. I was a Philadelphia, New York guy, and if you remember, the Philadelphia really didn't have the strong label. The strong labels were out of New York, and it was the Drifters and the Flamingos and Little Anthony and Imperials and the Spaniels. It was I was pre-Motown.
Wow. I know just the era we're talking about, and great music. Philadelphia music got its start with Bobby Rydell and what
Avalon,
the bubblegum music in that era.
Yes.
You're absolutely right about, and Philadelphia wasn't that far from New York, but no. It was a lifetime away on some levels. I got to ask you, because I went to camp with two Pearson Sporting Goods store. Do you remember them in Philly?
Yes, I do. Yeah, absolutely. Pearson's was an iconic store.
It was.
Because they had so many of their contracts with the high schools in time. If you remember the high school days, you brought your own gym shoes. And that what a change that is.
And they were Converse, and they were high tops.
That's right. And if you went low level, you went PF Kids.
Right. Or the only person I remember going low level in those days was Bill Russell and the Celtics. And U.S. Kids. What an era to grow up in.
Yeah.
What did you like to read as a kid?
I did the classics. I did the Musketeers, Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, Man Without a Country. My favorites were my favorite author was James Fenimore Cooper out of Burlington, New Jersey, who wrote The Last of the Mohicans and The Deer Slayer. He was one of my favorite classic writers. But those were gifts that my mother, I remember her giving to me at my birthday or gift days because I love to read. But those were my absolute favorites, was the classics. And I'm sure I read something that was really interesting with respect to adventure. You know, the Captain Marvel, Superman, Batman stuff of its day.
Right.
I was a voracious reader, though, and anyone that knew me and my family knew that if you were getting a gift for little Ray, just get him a book, and he'll be happy as a clam, and we'll never see him.
Well, little Ray didn't stay little very long. You were an NBA player. What other sports did you consider, or what other scouts for other sports considered you?
Well, I was being coming from the era that I came from in the 50s and 60s. Of course, I was a Jackie Robinson fan and a Philadelphia Kids fan and a Brooklyn Dodger fan, of course, and then the New York Giants. But because I was kind of quasi New York kid, because I loved the Giants and I loved the Dodgers. I too was a New York Giant fan and saw the Giants before they brought up Willie at the Polo Grounds and after they brought up Willie in 1951. So we have a lot in common there. Jackie was the essence of it all. I heard a quote once by Martin Luther King crediting Jackie as the grandfather of civil rights when they tried to tell him that he was. So sports are very, very instrumental. It always have been in bringing us together. I love it for that. I think New York was a principal mover because, you know, when they had Monty Irvin with the
yes,
and they had Hank Thompson and Ray Noble, they were an interesting organization, as was the Dodgers. The Dodgers were just seen as interlopers because they tried new things and they brought up Newcomb and Campy and Jim Gilliam, and you know they tried things, and so the Dodgers were very, very different in baseball at that time, and such a favorite of the minority communities, and they were also instrumental in bringing up stars from the Negro Leagues. Might never have gotten to see, like Larry Doby going with the Cleveland Indians. Larry Doby was a great Negro League player. A lot of us were not fortunate enough to see the great cool Papa Bell or Josh Gibson. We got to see a little bit of Satchel Paige. So it was a very interesting time being a kid that would read the newspapers and look for box scores and information. But I hearken back to the 20s when the great Grantland Rice brought the newspapers to the fore and gave us columns to read as kids because of the Babe and because of Jack Dempsey and because of the great football player out of Illinois. I can't think of his name now, but he was the Galloping Ghost.
Not Tom Harmon.
Yeah,
okay.
and the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse at Notre Dame. You know,
he
has a lot to read.
And win one for the Gipper. There was,
That's correct. That's correct. Newt Rockney, yeah.
There was always a bevy of literary stuff that you could get to in those days to read about.
Yes. Yes.
What interested you. Ray, I want to know how you were recruited. You went to Portland, and out of Philadelphia. I live on the West Coast now. I grew up on the East Coast, spent a lot of time in Oregon. I was the Tops West Coast representative, Tops baseball, and I have a lot of experience in north of San Francisco. I live in the Bay Area, and how life changes north of San Francisco. And I wonder how easy it was being, I like to say, a city person, right? You describe yourself as that. Going to Oregon must have been a hell of an adjustment.
Oh, to say the least.
Did I say that with as much respect for the great northwestern part of the country as I could muster?
Well, being an East Coast guy, let me give you the change. You're going to love the change, Joe. The change was I graduated in mid-year. So in mid-year, I had to make a decision. So I decided to go to junior college instead of sitting out for the rest of the year. I didn't want to, just laze around the neighborhood. So I registered at New York City Junior College, which was City Tech at the time, and that was in Brooklyn. So my first foray, when I first left home at 18 years old, I went to school in Brooklyn.
Wow.
And I learned New York. I learned New York from Brooklyn to the Bronx. And I knew how to go from downtown to uptown. I didn't miss a stop. I stopped in Manhattan, and I did cruise Manhattan in the Village and Times Square. I went to Harlem, and I cruised Harlem and 125th and 135th and 8th Avenue, and I cruised the Bronx. 210.
You hit Lenox Avenue somewhere along the line, I'm sure, up in Harlem, and I have memories of almost every borough in New York, and they all differ. It's incredibly eclectic as a city, and getting back to the adjustment of Portland, Oregon, how was that after not only a Philadelphia upbringing, but experience in New York, even a bigger city, and a more liberal city, I would have to say as well. How did you do it?
I think Oregon was a little overrated organically in terms of race. Because race was the standard of the time coming out of the 50s. Race was a systemic situation, so it generated itself nationwide. So there was no city that you could go to and not be reminded of the racial aspects of living in those communities. And Portland was among them. But it didn't get into mistreatment. What Portland did, because they were so sophisticated about who they were and how they wanted the Northwest to be, Portland to me seemed to just manifest itself, and you know the rules, what's expected, and that's how we look for you to act. My friend Elgin Baylor was up in Seattle at the same time. So we both went to Catholic schools on the West Coast, and those situations just kind of let us know of the variance of the big cities that we came, because Elgin came from Washington D.C. and I came from Philadelphia, and there was a guy, Charlie Brown, that came from Indiana, and Wally Panel and Jim Armstrong, my teammates, they came from Chicago. So we were all blending in to that Northwest Pendleton idea of integration. And to be quite honest, Portland would have been a great place to live. I don't know, what levels of employment there might have been there in terms of success, or what was available. But I certainly could see Portland being a wonderful place to live, because I'm always entranced by homeowners when I go to communities. I like to see where are the homeowners and who are the homeowners. And Portland was very interesting in that aspect. But I love the West Coast. I became a devotee of the Bay Area. I have a brother and a sister that live in San Francisco.
Really?
Yes, my family and I have been, until I became debilitated, my family and I, we made trips to San Francisco every few years. All of my children have been to San Francisco. They love San Francisco. There's nothing better than, I was going to say Ghirardelli Square, but there's nothing better than the waterfront.
The water. What is the? I'm trying to think of something, not Ghirardelli, but would they get all the crab and you see the Pier 39?
Fisherman's Wharf is what I'm speaking.
Fisherman's Wharf. I had a friend come out from New York. An uneducated friend, come out from New York when I was stationed in the Air Force, and he says, "You know where I want to go? Fisherman's Wharf."
Oh, that's funny. It was great. It's been great. That area has always appealed to me ever since I've since my first trip there. And my first trip there, I went as a Detroit Piston in 1963 when the Philadelphia Warriors moved from Philadelphia to San Francisco. So that was my first trip. And
I remember that year very well, because Paul Harrison didn't go with them to San Francisco.
He refused to go. Yeah, yes.
And he played in the EBL, and the connect there with you is that Sil Abel wrote a great book. I had him on my show, and you played in the EBL for a little while. Either that or coached in the EBL.
I played.
Did you play too? Okay.
Yeah, I played from 1958 until 1961. I left Portland in 1958, journeyed back to Philadelphia, because if I was going to do manual labor, which I was doing at Portland because I had lost my scholarship, I said I will do manual labor and be at home if I'm just going to be tired of working. Well, when I came back, I was contacted by the Eastern League Allentown Jets, and they brought me into their organization, and I stayed with them for 3 seasons, 2.5 seasons, and enjoyed it. We won. We did well, playing against Bill Spivey and his Baltimore Bullets. But I just, love playing in the Eastern League, and the plethora of talent there, as was written in Sil's book, was unbelievable. Jack Molina, Sherman White, Lloyd Langston.
Hal King-Lear, as Sil likes to call him.
Yes.
From Temple, and another Philadelphia guy. Let me ask you, Wally Jones, how big a part did he play in your life? Did you come across him? He was from Overbrook, and for one reason or another, I loved Wally Jones.
That puts a smile on my face, because with Wally Jones, there's a lot to love. Wally Jones and Walt Hazzard are two of the best guards to ever come out of Philadelphia behind Guy Rogers and Hal Lear. But Wally Jones brought a joy to the game that few people have ever witnessed. Again, another child of the 60s. Wally was actually a year behind me. We worked out together. One of Wally's great teammates was Wayne Hightower at Overbrook.
Another Overbrook guy.
Overbrook.
And one of the Pearsons, Craig, substituted on that Overbrook High School team. He was a backup, didn't play much, but on a team with Hightower and Wally Jones, he had nothing to be ashamed of. No. Tell me a Wilt story that I'd like.
Well, as there's very good qualification.
Right. I don't need to hear about his nightlife. I have a fantasized nightlife of my own. Why would I want to hear about his?
Well, he doesn't talk about mine, and I don't talk about his.
Okay, that's good.
One of my favorite stories, and it's in my book. I just finished the book. One of my favorite Wilt stories is we were neighbors in Cobbs Creek Parkway over in southwest Philadelphia. And so you'd see Wilt, driving around in this beautiful red Oldsmobile. And so, he'd be going to work out or something. So Wilt saw me riding my bike one day, and he said, "Hey, I'm going up to Haddington at 57th and Haddiford to work out. You want to work out? You look like you're getting ready to work out because you got your ball." And I said, "Yeah, I'm riding my bike up." And Wilt was, at that time, 18. He was 18 or 19, and I was 16 or 17. There was a 2-year difference. And we went to Haddington, and we worked out. We worked out all afternoon. We shot the ball. We ran. We did running drills, ball handling drills. We just had a good time. We were laughing and just having a ball. And I just said, what a great guy. And, because I played against him in high school, but he didn't know me from Adam's cat. I was just a 6'8" kid playing over at West Philly, his arch rival, that he would destroy with about 30, 40, 50 points. So he wasn't thinking about me personally, but at this particular day he did. And so we worked out, and we went, when we finished, and we just kind of got our drinks, and we were getting ready to, go home. I was getting ready to get on my bike, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm getting ready to drive back home." And Wilt said to me, "Absolutely not. Put your bicycle in my car. I'll drive you home." And that gave me such a feeling. I never lost. I never lost. Wilt Chamberlain giving me a ride home. And we became friends at that point. We never were close friends, but we became friends, and we stayed friendly until he passed. And before he passed, I spoke with him on the phone. He called me from California, and we had a conversation. But he's always been one of my favorite people, because to me, I have relegated Wilt Chamberlain to the position of the best player I've ever played against, and he is the best player I've ever seen. And I love Michael Jordan, and I love Bird and Magic. I love the great players. I love Curry, but the best basketball player I have ever seen is Wilton Norman Chamberlain.
Well, that's high praise, and I would take it a step further. He's probably the best athlete you've ever seen.
Yes.
All-around athlete.
Yeah.
Like Jackie Robinson, who we talked about before, you could name the sports, track and field, that he, volleyball as an example, that he absolutely excelled in. he was just bigger than life.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ralph. I was just going to say I didn't fully answer your question about what I participated in high school. I participated in football. I participated in track and field. I participated in baseball, and I participated in basketball. And I was only good enough at one of them to cause a stir. I got uniforms in all of them, but I was not a good baseball player. Couldn't hit a breaking ball. Not a good football player, too long and lean with no real body weight. I was slammed to the ground so hard, I literally retired on the spot. And in track and field, I high jumped, I think 5'1", and I threw the shot put, I think at that time, like 40 feet. So none of those feats of mine will live in infamy. They'll live in infamy, or they'll live in an area that we won't speak of.
Purgatory. Not infamy, but purgatory. Tell me a little bit about playing in the EBL, and was it just, as I understand it, it was weekends, and players held down positions in civilian life at that point. What did you work at in civilian life?
In Philadelphia, I worked in civilian life. I worked for Skymaster or something. They made the storm doors. This was the era of the window screens and storm windows being made, and I worked in a company that did that in Philadelphia. And really, most of my Philadelphia participation was really year-round basketball. I played with the Harlem Comedy Kids. I played with Harley Motors. Played with various teams, and some of those teams paid me. So in some cases, I made enough money to sustain myself. And then before I left, I worked for the Department of Welfare with the Youth Conservation Corps. So that was my final job. So I, too, worked during the week. I played a lot of basketball because I was just looking to improve my game, and not so much to play in the NBA, but just for self-satisfaction, because I was playing with Woody Salisbury and Andy Johnson and Hal Lear.
Those are two guys. I mentioned Hal Lear before, but two other guys that I'm incredibly curious about is Woody Salisbury. I was a Philadelphia Warrior apologist in those days. I was a Knick fan, but one of two of my camp friends were equipment managers and ball boys for the Warriors, and they bring up Harrison in the summertime to coach us and have clinics at the camp. And I have Woody Salisbury was a guy who came on so strong as a rookie, and in his first couple of years, he had a good career, but it was, would you say it was a disappointment given his early success with the Warriors? And
that's a good point, Ralph, because I don't know. I think what happened to Woody Salisbury is Tom Gola. When Tom Gola came with the Warriors, Woody Salisbury was let go. I think he was traded either to St. Louis, because I came in 61.
I think it was the Chicago Bulls.
Chicago Packers. He was with Chicago, and Andy, they were the forwards with Chicago, with Walt Bellamy.
And Andy Johnson, and Bellamy is another guy I'd like to find out about. because you were in Detroit when the Comives trade and the DeBuscher to New York, and Bellamy had been. The Knicks were centerless since Harry Gallatin, so with all due apologies to Ray Felix and Charlie Tyree, Bellamy was the first center with the Knicks that started to turn them around. And I like Bells, too. What was the anatomy of that trade? The Comives was in it. I remember it made the Knicks. It balanced out the Knicks. It let Reed be a center. Can you tell me anything about that trade, that the backstory of that trade that may interest me? And I'm sure it will.
Well, hopefully. Well, actually, that was one of the that was one of the phenomenal NBA trades because, as you indicated, it solidified the Knicks into becoming a championship team, and that was something they were dying for in New York, but they never had. With Connie Simmons and Gallatin and Sweets and the McGuires and so forth, they never quite built the team to withstand the vaunted Boston Celtics. No one, East or West, had anything on the Celtics. But the Knicks got to that spot first. Philadelphia did for a year. The Warriors and early on, the St. Louis Hawks had defeated them. Of the 11 titles that Russell and the 10 titles that Sam Jones that they won, those were the two teams that beat them. St. Louis Hawks with Lenny Wilkins and the great Bob Pettit and Bobby Lavelle and Cliff Hagan and Slater Martin and Zach McMahon. But the second team to beat them was probably one of the greatest teams of all time, which was the 1966 Philadelphia Warriors, featuring Wilt and Lucius Jackson and Chet Walker and Billy Cunningham, Hal Greer, Wally Jones. Wally Jones played a major role on that team. So that was a championship team. But those were the two teams that defeated the Celtics. But other than that, teams
few
were
and far
building.
Between.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was incredibly deep for years, incredibly deep. But at the end of their bench always sat a veteran, a Willie Knowles, a Wayne Embry. I think Carl Braun played for them in his final
Woody
few
Salisbury. Woody Salisbury played for them.
I didn't know that.
He played for the Celtics. Yes.
Ray, let me ask you about a kid that I grew up with. His name was Artie Stevenson. We went to the Y together when we were 10 years old. And Artie Stevenson played for Rhode Island and was a hell of a rebounder. And he played in the EBL. Did your paths cross at all?
Not to my. The Artie I knew went to New England school, and he was a New York kid. But this guy was about 6 and about 215, and he was an excellent player. But I don't know that it was Artie Stevenson. I think it might have been Artie Cohen. I'm thinking. But at any rate, there was just a plethora of great players at that time.
Hey, Artie Cohen, Artie Stevenson, all we Jews look alike.
No, and guess what? Artie Cohen was African American.
Oh, okay. Ruins my joke, but educates me a bit.
Yeah. but no, I know you remember the Stokes. There was Vernon Stokes, Maurice Stokes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Vernon
Tragic
Stokes played
story.
in New York, and Maurice played in France.
I don't remember his brother, but I do remember the tragedy of Maurice Stokes and how Jack Twyman helped him.
So, he didn't have a brother. Jack Twyman was his brother. Jack made himself his brother.
Okay.
Jack took care of him until the day he died.
How good could have he been in the NBA? How would he be remembered today if he had stayed healthy?
He would be known as one of the best of all time.
And I recently spoke with Sam Stith, who gave me time on this air. Good guy. How good was his brother? And I'll ask you the same question. How would he be remembered if he didn't develop tuberculosis?
Right. Well, that's an excellent question, because Sam Stith is the guy that was drafted instead of me by the New York Knicks in 1961. Tommy was at the All-American at St. Bonaventure. Great player, silky smooth, sweet shots. He was kind of a miniature Elgin Baylor, in my opinion. So he was a great, great player. But when they drafted him, number one, he was a New Yorker. And number two, I was coming out of the East League. And by the way, I'm one of the few guys, and maybe the only guy ever drafted out of the Eastern League to play in the NBA. Not only was I the first, I was drafted out of the NBA, out of the Eastern League by the NBA. And so that was always an interesting statistic to me. But Stith, you're asking about Tommy Stith. He was a great player. He was drafted number 2 in the United States in 1961. And third that was drafted was Larry Siegfried, who played on the great teams with Jerry Lucas out of Ohio State. And then I was drafted 4th. And I was drafted from the Allentown Jets.
Well, did you have any Olympic experience at all, or tryouts, or
no?
In your career?
In 1960, I didn't get a phone call. I thought I was going to be drafted, but I didn't get a phone call. The 3 African-American Olympians in 1960, when President Kennedy was elected, was Oscar Robertson, Walt Bellamy, and Bob Boozer. Those were the 3 guys. Those 3, Oscar, Boozer, and Bellamy. And Oscar and Boozer both went to the Cincinnati Royals.
Well, I bet it was Adrian Smith that beat you out, and I'll bet it was.
Odie, and one of the greatest shooters ever.
So it's no real disgrace to be beaten out by him. Cincinnati never gelled with Oscar and Embry. They never became as good as St. Louis or as good as the Warriors. There was always something.
They were not as talented.
Okay,
they had Arlen Bockhorn out of Dayton, who was a good day-to-day professional basketball player, but they weren't renowned for their cast of players because I don't think they could even pay them. But their center was Connie Durkin before Wayne Embry. Connie Durkin and Wayne Embry, they didn't scare anyone in the middle. And they had Jack Twyman, and they had early on they did Bob Boozer before Jerry Lucas. So the Cincinnati was known to trade. They tried to trade, but it was difficult. But the company that they were in the NBA after the Boston Celtics, it was just the rest of the NBA. It was there was no team there at that time that really challenged the Celtics. I guess the biggest challenge for the Celtics was in their own conference, which is the Philadelphia Warriors or the Philadelphia 76ers. So at that time, it was kind of stated when the season began, okay, guys, Celtics got this one. Who's going to finish second?
Right. Hey,
that was the way it was. That was the way of life.
Let's take a second. You were talking about Boston. Sam Jones died a few days ago.
Yes.
And let's remember him a little bit. He was absolutely great. That bank shot was unstoppable. And if he had played in New York, I can't imagine what they'd be saying about him today. He was tremendous. You mentioned Jerry Lucas and Bob Woozer. They both ended up with my Knicks at one time.
Yes.
And what I remember about Bob Woozer is he'd shoot his free throws not in the middle of the basket, you know.
Right.
Off to the left. I think it was off to the left. Yes. Was he just more comfortable with that shot, or what was? If you have any recollections?
Yeah, that was his comfortability. That was his area of. I think what Bob did. Bob shot from each area of the free throw line, and where he made the most of his shots in practice, that's where he shot his free throws, and he found that spot to be very comfortable for him. No one could, because it denied the laws of physics, because you're shooting across your body.
Right.
He was, and so that it just defied the laws. But who's to say? You know, Bobby was successful. He had a great career, averaged 20 points a game, became an all-star, was an All-American. So you can't argue with success.
Yeah, how's it for points, Coach? Hey, tell me a little bit about your coaching experience, and did you miss it when it was gone?
Yeah, I absolutely miss coaching in the NBA, because what you did in the NBA as a coach is you designed your system, and your system had to be designed for over 100 games. Because remember, NBA players played 80 regular season games, they played out of season games, and they played playoffs. So you had to design your system to last for 80 to 100 games. And I just remember trying to prepare my team so that they had a system they would be comfortable with every night. It wasn't complicated. It was a system where we would utilize our strengths. And the strengths when I coached were Dave Bing and Bob Lanier. Those were two Hall of Famers that were outstanding players and made us a very good team. My problem was we became a very good team. At the same time, the Chicago Bulls was a very good team with Sloan and Van Leer, and that Milwaukee was a very good team with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bobby
Dandridge, right?
Yes.
And
yes.
For a while, Oscar played with that team.
And for a while, yes. So it was no day at the beach in the NBA. Again, when you, as I coached, the dominant team became the Knicks. The Knicks became a very good team. Los Angeles stayed a good team before Kareem got there because they had Wilt. And Ralph, I'll tell you something. Have you ever seen a team that has had the good fortune to not draft Shaq, Kareem, Wilt, Elmore Smith, and the kid from Pau Gasol? How do you get all of those big men and you never drafted them?
Wow, that's food for thought, all right. That is
I don't know how the Lakers pull that off, but they got the greatest centers in the history of basketball, and they never drafted any of them.
Well, how I'm still thinking, how did Kareem not go to St. John's? That's how did he get to L.A.? Was Wooden that good a recruiter as well as a coach?
Well, he was as good as Frog Allen, who recruited Wilt Chamberlain out of Philadelphia, that has 5 universities in their area: St. Joe's, LaSalle, Villanova, Pennsylvania, and Temple. And not one of those.
Wilt only stayed at Kansas for 1 year, if I'm not mistaken.
He stayed 3 years.
And then he went to
3 years.
Oh, did he really?
Stayed 3 years. Yes.
Oh,
he played for the championship against North Carolina with Lenny Rosenbluth.
That
was when African American kids could not play in the ACC, and African American kids could not play in the SEC, but they could play in the Big 8. And Wilt went to the Big 8 with Kansas. That's in my book, how all of that transpired. But Wilt Chamberlain left a city, and it was a northeastern city that had 5 universities, and went to a school in the Midwest in Kansas. Tell me how that happened.
Well, you see why I was so amazed that you went to Portland for the same reasons?
Yes. I was not, nor was I recruited in Philadelphia. Nor was I recruited. I was not.
Okay.
I was not. No, the first African American player of note to be recruited by Villanova University was Wally Jones.
Whoa. Yeah. I knew there was a reason I liked him as a fan.
He was great. He was great.
As are you as a guest, Ray. This has been terrific, and I'd like to know that I can call you someday and we'll have a repeat, and I can jot down all the things I should have asked him, like most of my interviews go. Like, if I only would have asked Ray Scott this or that.
My friend, all you have to do is call, and I'm there.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for a great show. Thanks for listening, everybody. It's the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm the Tokin Jew, Ralph Tyko. Be well, Ray. Tokin with it.
Thank you. Be well, my friend.
You too. Adios, everybody, and happy trails.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned Network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.